Hey, good morning again. I know some of you are very lost, and it is confusing until you really know what's going on, and that's okay. But once you see that it's not as hard as you think, you'll fly through the rest. Today, we're finding one missing part at a time. Tomorrow, you'll find all the missing parts, and that's called solving a right triangle. All right, so here we go. Remember we said yesterday, or last night, or whenever you saw the video, that the pattern to follow for proportions on a 45-45, because it's isosceles, both legs have a 1-to-1 ratio because they're exactly the same. And the hypotenuse is the square root of 2 times longer than the legs. So if the leg is 1 times the square root of 2 is simply the square root of 2. If the leg was, say, 4, let's look at this and say, hey, this leg is 4. Then 4 times the square root of 2 is 4 square roots of 2. So this original triangle that we're looking at, the 45, 45, 90, this is like your template. This tells you what the multiples are between the legs and the hypotenuse. And I said to you, if you can't memorize the pattern, to use the pattern to set up proportions between your template here and the new triangle they give you. Okay, on this one, they're looking for the leg. What are they giving me? They're giving me the hypotenuse. So I said, if you want, you can simply set up a proportion and solve. Since we're comparing a leg to a leg, that'd be 1 compared to the L. Then we're going to take the hypotenuse and compare it to the hypotenuse, which is the square root of 2 compared to 8 square roots of 2. Cross multiply and solve. 1 times 8 square roots of 2 is 8 square roots of 2. And L times the square root of 2 is the leg times the square root of 2. How do you solve for the leg? To get the leg alone, you divide each side by the square root of 2. Square root of 2 divided by the square root of 2 leaves the leg. Square root of 2 divided by square root of 2 is 1. 1 times 8 is 8. Now, I also said that these are nothing but similar triangles, and similar triangles have a scale factor. Look at the square root of 2. What did we multiply the square root of 2 by to get 8 square roots of 2? We multiplied square root of 2 by what? Yeah, 8. And if the leg is represented by 1, then 1 times 8 tells me that these legs must be 8. You can do it both ways. You can do it by setting up your ratio and proportion and solving, or you can set it up by looking for the multiple. On the 45, 45, 90s, you're doing one of two things. Either to go from a leg to the hypotenuse, you take the leg and multiply by the square root of 2. That gives you your hypotenuse. If you're going from the hypotenuse to the leg, which is smaller, you would take the hypotenuse and divide by the square root of 2 to get to the leg. Here, you're getting bigger. Here, you're getting smaller. And if you look at your ratio and proportions, you're either going to divide by the square root of 2 or multiply by the square root of 2. It's really not a trick. It's just using what you know and applying it. Okay, let's look at another one. And don't forget, you can pause these videos and write them down. You can look at them over and over again. There's nothing saying that you have to do this in class for 20 minutes and then go home and say you're totally lost. Watch them again. All right, so here we go again. Looking at this triangle, this is a 30, 60, 90. I'm going to put in my 60 degrees. Again, this is your template. Starting with the smallest side, because it's easiest to start there, this has a relationship of 1 to the hypotenuse, which is 2. If the small leg is 1 and the hypotenuse is 2, that tells me that the hypotenuse is twice as big as the leg, because 1 times 2 is 2. And if we look at the medium side and compare it to the small side, what do we multiply 1 by to get to the square root of 3? Well, it's pretty easy. 1 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 3. So to go from the small leg to the hypotenuse, we take the small and multiply by 2. To go from the small to the medium, or I like to call it the longer leg, we take the small times the square root of 3. And that's called the equation method. I call that using the proportion or scale factor. Once you understand what you're doing, it becomes quite easy. But the foolproof way to do it is to set up a ratio and proportion so that you never make a mistake. Now you have to look and say, hey, what are they giving me? And what do they want? According to this picture, they're giving me the medium leg, and they want the hypotenuse. So setting up a ratio and proportion, we have to compare corresponding or like pieces. So we go back to the original and say the original medium is the square root of 3. The original medium is the square root of 3. The new medium is 2 square roots of 3. We have to have something to compare it to, and we want the hypotenuse, so we're going to compare it to the hypotenuse. The original hypotenuse is 2. The new hypotenuse, I don't know, so we're going to call it T. Original square root of 3 is the medium. 2 is the original hypotenuse compared to 2 square roots of 3, which is the new, compared to T, which is the new hypotenuse. Cross multiply and solve. Square root of 3 times T equals 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times the square root of 3. How do we get t by itself? We divide each side by the square root of 3, and t equals 4. What is t? T is my new hypotenuse. Now, I've done these before, so I know the pattern very, very well. Once you do the pattern this way, using the corresponding triangles, you don't have to set a new triangle up every single time if you set it up at the top of your paper. At the top of your paper, just like Mr. Reppert wrote it on the whiteboard, if you write down your patterns or look at your reference sheet and you see the patterns, 1, square root of 3, 2, you don't have to draw a triangle every single time. And once you realize what you're doing, you're going from medium to small, small to hypotenuse. If you do it in the equation form, you have to do 2 steps. If you do it in proportion form, you have to do 3 steps, or 2 steps. Let's look. What did I multiply the small by, which is 1, to get to 2 square roots of 3? Hey, in order to get from the small to 2 square roots of 3, we took the small, which is 1, multiplied it by 2 to get to 2 square roots of 3. So the small had to be 2. And what is the relationship between the small and the hypotenuse? It was a 1 to 2 ratio. So if we take the small, which is 2, and multiply it by 2, we get the hypotenuse, which is 4. Once you've done a lot of these, it will be really easy for you to move around the special right triangle. But until you do 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, you won't be able to do it as quickly as I can do it. You need to go through the steps and see. Let's look at another one. Ooh, I went backwards on my notes. I am so sorry. I wonder what happened to the rest of them. Okay, I accidentally insert this one in the wrong spot. I'm going to come back to this one. All right, let's look at this one. Remember, you already have this written on your paper. You don't have to write it over and over again. Small is 1. The medium is a little bit bigger. It's 1 times the square root of 3. And the hypotenuse is twice as big as the small. So that gives me a relationship of 1 square root of 3, 2. This is already on your paper. You don't have to write it over and over and over again. What are they asking me for here? They're asking me for the small. What are they giving me? The hypotenuse. So we know that the small and the hypotenuse have a 1 to 2 relationship. The hypotenuse is twice as big. So if you start to get this, we should be able to say that the hypotenuse is twice as big as the small. So if my hypotenuse on the new one is 16, if I divide it by 2, I should be able to get the small is 8. If you can't do that yet because you haven't practiced enough, set up your ratios and plug in what you know. The original small is 1 compared to the new small that we're looking for. compare that to the original hypotenuse, which is 2, compared to the new hypotenuse, which is 16. Then you simply cross multiply and solve. 2 times s is 2s. 1 times 16 is 16. The small is going to be half the size of the hypotenuse, which is 8. They call these special right triangles because actually, if you don't give up and you practice, they become easier than anything you're going to do. But because you've never seen anything like it before, it seems very difficult. It is not difficult. It is actually pretty easy. So don't give up on yourself. Just because it looks odd, don't give up and say you can't do it. All right, let's look at another one. Okay, here we go. The hardest part is identifying what are they giving me and what are my comparing. All right, this time I'm not going to draw the triangle. I'm going to say it's a 30, 60, 90. So we have small, medium, hypotenuse. The small has a relationship of 1. Medium has a relationship of ratio of square root of 3. And the hypotenuse is twice as big as the small. Small to medium is a 1 to square root of 3 ratio. Small to hypotenuse is a 1 to 2 ratio. Set up your proportions. Okay? What are they giving me? They're giving me the small. What do they want? They want the medium. Okay? So if they're giving me the small, we're going to compare that 1 to 5. They want the medium, so we're going to compare that square root of 3 compared to k. Cross multiply. K equals 5 square roots of 3. And you're done. Now, if you looked at the problem and said, hey, if I have a 1 and I want to get to a square root of 3, all I do is multiply by the square root of 3. If they're giving me this small 5, all I have to do is multiply 5 times the square root of 3, and I get the medium. That's why they're called special. They're not hard. They're special. But you have to know the relationship of 1, square root of 3, and 2. The proportions just make it easy to set it up and execute it every single time. Okay, here's a 45, 45, 90. Again, you either have the picture drawn on your paper where the legs are the same, so that's a 1 to 1 ratio, and the hypotenuse takes the leg 1 and multiplies it by the square root of 2. Okay, over here, I'm going to do leg, leg, hypotenuse. It's a 1 to 1 relationship, so the legs are exactly the same, or a leg compared to the hypotenuse takes the leg and multiplies it by the square root of 2. Now look at what they're giving you. They're giving you not one leg, but 2 legs because it's isosceles. To go from a leg to the hypotenuse, if you understand what I'm talking about with taking 1 and multiplying it by the square root of 2, I would take my leg and multiply it by the multiple or scale factor square root of 2. That would give me the hypotenuse. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2. For every 2, we take out 1. Or square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is square root of 4. The square root of 4 is 2. 2 times 7 is 14. If you start to see the relationships, you can use equations. Mrs. Williams, I still don't get the shortcut or the special relationship, so I'm going to set up a proportion. Okay? And then you set up the proportions using what you know compared to what they're giving you. I know the leg has got a relationship of 1 compared to the new leg, which is 7 square roots of 2. They want the hypotenuse, so I go back to the original hypotenuse, which is nothing but the square root of 2, compared to d. Cross multiplying and solving. D times 1 is d. 7 square roots of 2 times square roots of 2. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is nothing but 2. D equals 7 times 2, which is 14. Okay, these are not hard. It does require you to understand whether you're getting bigger, you're multiplying by the square root of 2. If you're getting smaller, you're dividing by the square root of 2. Given a leg, we multiply by the square root of 2 to get to the hypotenuse. Given a hypotenuse, we're going to divide by the square root of 2 to get to the leg. On a 30, 60, 90, given the small, we multiply by the square root of 3 to get to the medium. Given the small, we multiply by 2 to get to the hypotenuse. The one that is tricky, if you're only using equations, is given the medium, how do I get, given the medium, how do I get to the hypotenuse? You would have to do it in 2 steps. There's only a relationship between small and medium and small and hypotenuse. In order to start with the medium, you first have to get to the small. And how do you get from the medium to small? Well, if you multiply by the square root of 3 to get to the medium, you would divide by the square root of 3 to get to the small. And once I know the small, I can get to the hypotenuse by taking that small, multiplying it by 2 to get to the hypotenuse. Proportions do it immediately. There is no middleman. But when you're using equations like this, you need to get back and forth in order to find what you're looking for. Let me say that again. Given the medium, I divide by the square root of 3. That will give me the small. I then know that the small times 2 is going to give me my hypotenuse. So really, it's not hard. 1 square root of 3, 2. To go from small to hypotenuse, I multiply by 2. To go from small to medium, I multiply by the square root of 3. Backwards, you divide. Instead of multiplying by 2, hypotenuse divided by 2. To go from medium back to small would be medium divided by the square root of 3. In either case, you end up with the small. Why do we want the small? Because the small is easy. It's a 1 ratio, and anything times 1 is easy to find. All right. I hope that helped. Let's go back to this question. Oh no, Mrs. Williams, there is no triangles. Oh no. All right. That's where knowing what you're doing comes in hand. In a 30, 60, 90, the short leg is the square root of 2. How long is the hypotenuse? Okay. Not hard to do. 1 square root of 3, 2. According to this, they're giving me the short leg, the square root of 2. They don't want the medium leg. They want the hypotenuse. And we know the hypotenuse is how much bigger? Twice as big. So simply take the small times square root of 2, which is going to give me the hypotenuse. 2 square roots of 2. Again, if you're still not getting the shortcut, go back to proportions. What are they giving me? The short. We know the original is a 1. The new is square roots of 2. What do they want? They want a hypotenuse. We remember that the original hypotenuse is 2 compared to the new hypotenuse. Cross multiply. H times 1 is 1h. 2 times the square root of 2 is 2 square roots of 2. And you're done. I hope that helped, and I hope I didn't run out of